This was in December of 1899. And at that time, my grandparents had 7 children, of which my aunt, her name was Wilma, but her sort of English name was like Michalina or something. And she was 13 and a half at the time, and it was Hanukkah time. And I think they had got a new nanny or something like that. I think there were 7 children. She was the oldest, and there was 2 other sisters, and four boys. And she was left to stay with a couple of the younger kids while the rest of the family went out to synagogue, I think. And this nanny suggested that they go for a little walk. And they went out for a walk, and they went past a convent. And the gates opened, and they grabbed her and brought her into the convent. And after a couple of hours, my grandparents were frantic trying to find out where she was, and finally they interrogated the nanny, and she told them what she had done. She was, encouraged or employed to do this. And they went to the convent and tried to get her out, and they said, sorry, you can't get her out. And eventually she got spirited from convent to convent because my grandfather went to the police. The police tried. They couldn't, get through her. There was this whole thing about, well, she's got 30 days in which she can decide whether she wants I guess at 15 or 14, she can decide what religion she wants to be in, and they basically brainwashed her and spirited her around. My grandfather went to a number of places trying to get her out. He even went to the local mafia. And when the local rabbi heard that he was going to the mafia, he says, no, you really can't do this because there'll be a big pogrom if there's some attack or whatever on these various convents where, he paid people off to find out where she was. Eventually he went to the Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, and he pleaded his case in front of her. I still have a gold coin that came back from Austria that he had gotten and was handed down to me as a memento of the visit, whatever that was. And it just, years went by. He sort of had an idea where she might be. And one time he went, I think it was in Breslau, and found out where she was. He went to her, but by that time she was already married. They married her off. And she had a child. And she said, look, I can't abandon my child because if I go with you now, the church will never let my child go with me, and it'll have to go with the father. So they were stuck. And for years, then the war came. No one heard, no one knew anything about her, where she was or what she was doing, and they just sort of, who knows whether she would have been killed in the Holocaust. But and then jump forward. In 1958, one of my uncles in Israel, the chemical engineer, his name was Yehuda, he was sent to a conference in Amsterdam. He didn't know why he was sent to that conference because this was not his area of specialty. He was in the potash works and Dead Sea works in Israel, and it was really nothing of interest to him. But they all had name tags, and somebody comes up to him and he says, I know your sister. And it turned out the person who said this was her nephew from her, I guess, her husband. And they started to try to correspond. And with some difficulty, because she couldn't get out of Poland, she managed to go to Trieste just to meet him. And they started to talk, and they tried to find out a little bit about her. And the rest of the brothers got involved. And she was really a Catholic. I mean, she was a practicing Catholic. I mean, one of the things that the church did, that the nuns did to her, is they would dress somebody up in women's clothing, and they'd come and beat her and make her think that this was her mother, and to get her to think that her only mother was Mary. And so they really brainwashed her. And she was very well educated. She taught and she played piano. She was very well placed in Polish society or the community. And she did not want to let go. Her husband had died previously. She had 3 children, a daughter who died, a son who died, and she had one son who had married and had children, so she had grandchildren. But it was very, very difficult, so for probably over a couple of year period, they were trying to correspond with her, and finally, they met in Trieste, and finally they got her to come and visit Israel. And the whole tactics there was that she wanted to come and still retain her Christian, her Catholic religion. And so the brothers either set this thing up, or my father was sort of gravitated into the role from New York as the bad guy versus the good guy cop. So the good guys would, kind of be nice to her, and my father would say, no, you have to renounce your Catholicism, and if you're going to come to Israel and you're going to visit in Israel, you have to come as a Jew. And she did come to Israel. One of my father's oldest brother, who was the one at the Diamond Exchange, Isaac, who lived in New York, he had been so traumatized when he was a kid about this as a child that he wanted to have nothing to do with it. But the next younger brother, Avram, who was a very religious one, he was the one who was head of the, not head of, but active in this Belgian stock market. He sort of got to her and worked on her, and eventually she came and she stayed for a few months in Israel. And eventually they said to her, listen, what do you want to do? And they kept on working with her. There was one Passover Seder where she claimed she didn't know Yiddish. She claimed she didn't know Hebrew. She claimed she didn't know anything. And she had been very well educated because my grandfather really believed in educating the girls. And they were very, very knowledgeable about, Jewish affairs. They knew Hebrew. They knew Yiddish. They knew everything. And so in the midst of the Seder, they had a Haggadah, which was English, because she also knew. She knew many languages, and Hebrew. And it was very clear to them that she was following the Hebrew. And one of the aunts blurted out, oh, you're singing and you're following the Hebrew. And she kind of just stopped and clammed up and stopped. Eventually, they kept on working with her. She decided that, yeah, I'm going to be a Jew, and I'm going to give it up. And the most difficult thing was for her to go to her mother's grave. It was in the cemetery in Tel Aviv. Her father's grave she could go to because she had more of a relationship with what they had done, to her mother's grave. And they gave her pictures of her mother and her father. She displayed the father's picture. The mother's one she put down, face down. She just couldn't look at it. And eventually she did place it straight up. She put flowers on it, on the table where she had it in her house. I mean, she really came a long way. I mean, the poor woman, what she had gone through. And she eventually moved to a senior home in Israel. And we met her in one of our trips to Israel. And she was such a lady. I mean, her face was like without a wrinkle. And this was when she was close to 80. She was just a magnificent, classical, beautiful, she knew exactly how to conduct herself because of, I guess, her background in Poland. And we thought she was fabulous. And she eventually died and was buried in a Jewish cemetery. This is the book, Michalina, Daughter of Israel, written by my aunt. When she got an Israeli identity card, and one of my aunts went with her to go there. And the clerk, looking over the pages of her Polish documents, looked suddenly up at the straight-backed aristocratic figure before him and asked her, "Are you a Roman Catholic?" Her reply was firm and definite: "No, I am not." She moved to the senior citizens' home at the end of August 1962, about 60 years after she had emerged from the convent at Bruges.